Today, I'm going to show you how to make my grandmother's recipe for sweet potato pie. And it's got a very interesting history and a personal link from me to Kentucky Bourbon. Welcome back to Gary's Urban Logger. My name is Gary Rice, a home cook with more than 50 years of experience. We're making my grandmother's sweet potato pie. It's a traditional dish, particularly in the African American community at this time of year in the festive season, in the autumn and winter. But it really has a link that could be surprising to some, a link to American history and to a dark time in American history, actually, the use of enslaved labor. And through this story, through the making of this recipe, I'll share that with you. And I've also got a personal link to one of the ingredients we're using in this recipe. An ingredient used by my grandmother and introduced to me, and that's bourbon. So she didn't introduce me to bourbon as a boy, but it was in her recipe. So hang around to the end and I'll tell you that story. Turning to the ingredients for our pastry, we have lard, flour, and salt, and some iced water. And I have a chilled bowl here. So we have some extra flour that we're going to use for dusting when we roll it out. My intention is to do all of this by hand today. So I remove my ring and start by adding our flour and our salt. So I'm just going to combine those by hand just so that salt's distributed. And then I'm going to add our lard. Now you might find it curious that I'm using lard. There are lots of other ingredients that could be used, but lard again has a link to American history, and particularly to enslaved people. It's a byproduct of rendering hogs. It was done by enslaved labor, and lard was plentiful, and it was the fat most available, often most available to enslaved people, and so they used it. So after emancipation, it continued to feature in their cooking, particularly in the South, in the southern United States. Now I'm just cutting this in by hand, and it's literally just rubbing the flour into the fat. And you want to do this with the ends of your fingers, not the palm of your hand, which is going to have more heat. So we're just going to do that until that's finally incorporated. It looks a bit like a crumb. I'm just going to make that. And you could, if you don't want to do it by hand, you could use a pastry cutter to cut it in, or a fork with a knife. A lot of people use that technique. Or you could pulse this in your food processor. But today we're talking about traditions. And I think the traditions and having a stronger connection to not only our personal history, but to our food history is really important, particularly at this time of year. So, and it's a good thing to get young ones involved, blossoming cooks, curious people, little people, and let them try it and put their little fingers and hands to work and tell them the stories of your family in your history and how important it was, whether it was grandma's recipe or Uncle Joe's or Aunt Peggy's, whoever it was. Share that, because often so much of our oral history is being lost. So help me to maintain that tradition, would you? And also drop in the comments below some of your own stories and some of your own recipes and the links to your own personal family history. I'd find it interesting. So we now have that crumb. You can see the consistency of that. So what we're doing, the reason we do it, is to distribute the fat, like we did with the salt, throughout the flour. And now, to bring it together, we're going to add the iced water, tablespoon at a time, to bring it all together. And while I have a second, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel. Give us a thumbs up if you're enjoying this, and share it with your friends. It really helps the channel out. Okay, I've just added 2 tablespoons, 30 mils, of iced water to this. And again, I'm just wanting this to come together. So we don't want it overly wet. And once that starts to come together into a ball, we know we have enough liquid. And we don't want to overhandle it. Overhandling will make it tough. And we don't want tough pastry. So I think I've got enough water in there, enough moisture. It's about 3½ tablespoons. Yeah. And I'm just going to dust the surface. And I'm going to turn this out onto our surface. And you can see that holds together. And that really is all there is to making pastry. So I know some of you are afraid to do it. Say it never turns out. I hear you, Julie. And, just give it another go. Nothing beats a failure like a try. So just keep trying. So I might just a little water on top and just work that in. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this in a damp tea towel, and now I'll refrigerate it. After I have it into a disc, I'll refrigerate it for 20 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes. 15 at a push, you really need to, but no less than that. So we want this dough to rest. So while it's resting in the refrigerator, we'll make our filling. I've roasted the potatoes, and what I'm going to do is just split them, and I'm going to give them a good push and actually into my bowl. So I have a spoon, which can be helpful if the skin does stick, but it's really fairly straightforward, pretty easy to do. So I roasted these in an oven at 350, 180. Fan if you can. So if you have a convection setting, use it, because it's really helpful in terms of the roasting of these potatoes. But again, just you want to pull them out of the skin. You can see how easily that comes out. And where it might stick, you just give it a scrape with a spoon and it comes off. So I'll do the rest of these, and then we will mash them up along with some of our other ingredients. I have the sweet potatoes, the roasted sweet potatoes, and I just now use a masher to push that down, just like you would a regular potato. The sweet potato, we want to get this flesh nice and smooth. Again, you could use some equipment, but for me, there's something really special about doing it the old-fashioned way, by hand. A little elbow grease and a lot of love. So that's pretty well mashed as I would like it. Use my little spatula, scrape off any excess. It has a nice sweetness already, but we are going to enrich this. So we'll start with the brown sugar, the granulated sugar. Now this is softened butter. You can use melted butter if you prefer, but I think it's fine as long as it's really soft. Now the egg. So until I add, I'm going to just combine these now, and then I'll start to add our flavorings. So I'm just using a spatula just to get that all combined. It already smells great. So we'll switch to a wire whisk a little later, so we'll make sure everything is really well distributed. You can see those little bits of butter. I'm trying to break those up as best I can. Don't worry, when they melt in the oven, they will impart that richness, luxurious richness throughout the pie. But I don't want any huge pieces, so I'm just making sure those are broken up. Okay, now I'm going to add my cinnamon. And I am going to add a generous amount of grated nutmeg. Again, these are spices that enslaved people would have had access to, and traditions that were carried on throughout generations. So I've got that nutmeg added. I'm just going to stir those in to combine. And for me, nutmeg and cinnamon are the fragrances of the holiday season. To that, generous amount of vanilla extract. Now that's probably something they may not have had. They may have had vanilla bean and bourbon. Nice amount of bourbon. And this is going to be so good. Really good. Now, if that's not enough, we're going to add our evaporated milk. I'm just going to add that a bit at a time. There are measurements that you'll find in the link in the description box, which takes you to the recipe at my website. But because sweet potato naturally has its own amount of moisture, and the egg, sizes of the egg, you know, these are a strongly suggested guide, but you need to be able to use your own common sense, your own experience, your own knowledge. So as you become more confident as a cook, to be able to adjust as needed. So again, you'll use your own judgment in terms of these quantities. If it looks too wet for your liking, reduce the amount of liquid. If it looks too stiff, increase it. You know, have some confidence in your own creativity. And I'm sure many of you do. I know it's more challenging if you're just starting out. You're a young cook, beginner cook. Maybe you're an old cook and just started. So either way, enjoy the adventure. Enjoy the process. So I'm going to add the rest of that now. put my spatula aside for my handy whisk. And I'm just going to give this mixture a good whisk to combine it. And you can see that the bits of butter have been broken up. You distribute it throughout this mixture for our pie. Oh, I'm being a bit messy, but I'll clean it up. It smells like the holidays. Okay. I am happy with the consistency of that. And some people may want something smoother if you're using a processor or another appliance, hand mixer. Then yes, it'll be smoother. But I'm going for hand tools, the old-fashioned way. And I bet you my pie is just as good as yours. So we'll set this aside and we'll check on our pastry. We'll roll it out, fill our pastry, our pie tin, and then we'll put this in a moderately hot oven, 350 degrees Fahrenheit, 180 Celsius. No fan, no convection, just standard oven for baking on the lower shelf for 50 to 60 minutes. So, as I say, I'll set this aside and now we'll roll out our pastry. Let's roll out our pastry. I'm just going to dust the surface lightly with the flour, the extra flour, also my hands, and also the pen. Now that has rested in the refrigerator, and what we want to do is roll that out. And I'm just going to lightly dust both sides of that. And as I roll it, push away, and then I'm going to turn that so that it doesn't stick to the surface. Give it a half turn. And we're going to get this about between 1/4 and 1/8 of an inch. So what is that? Inch is roughly 2.5 millimeters rather. And well, you do the maths. So one more turn. Don't worry about the split. If your pastry does that. This is a very short pastry, and any holes or gaps we can fill as we put it together. In fact, I've got a big one in the middle there. So what I'm going to do is just take that bit there, and I'm just going to push that in. You see that? What could be easier? So once you have that to the size you need, it's fairly even, not stuck. There we go. I'm going to just wrap this around the pen. Bits that have come off. Take my pie dish. And you see I have a fluted pen, and I'm just going to roll that back out over the tin. And then I'm going to just gently put that into place. So that it covers fully the bottom. And then I will gently, don't want to tear it. If you do, we can patch it. I will pull that into those flutes. Now, some of you may be using a more traditional pie dish, and you can use your fingers to actually make your own flute, your own crimping of the edge. But I like the effect of this, and it also has a push-up bottom. So I've got a little hole, so I'm going to fill that. A push-up bottom so I can put it on a glass or a jar, something inverted, and drop that down. And then I have my pie, which will come out away from this fluted edge. So I'm just going to take the pin and roll it over the top, and then the excess comes away. So there we have the case ready for our pie. But before we add the filling, we want to refrigerate this for another 15 minutes so it's very firm. So we'll do that, and then we'll add our pie filling. Join me in just a second. Taking our pie case out of the refrigerator where it chilled for 15 minutes, and now we're just going to add the filling. Now, I don't know if it will take all of this, but if not, then we'll have some for a small pie. Now, it's going to take it. I love a spatula, get every bit of it. There we have it. Just going to wipe that off of the side of the case because that will darken. Now we'll put this in our moderately hot oven, 350 Fahrenheit, 180 Celsius, on the lower rack for 50 to 60 minutes. And then we'll pull it out, we'll have a look and a taste. And I haven't forgotten about my story about the bourbon. I'll tell you that after I return. Be right back. Our pie has come out of the oven, and it has been cooled on the wire rack, and now it's the time to remove it from its case, hopefully without doing any damage. And it looks like we've got a couple places where the filling has overflowed. So I'm just going to run my knife just to loosen those up. It's just where the sugar caught. So hopefully, it smells amazing. I wish you were here. Let's see if we can get that off without doing any damage. There we have our pie, our sweet potato pie. We've lost some crust, but it smells amazing. So I'm just going to put it here. And then we'll give it a taste. Well, thank you for making it to the end. It's now time to give this a slice. But I did promise you to tell you about my link to Kentucky Bourbon. And this is Basil Hayden. Now, my father was born and raised in central Kentucky. And central Kentucky is an area famous for a couple of things. Kentucky Bourbon, and it's known as the heart of Catholicism in the Americas, in the US. And that's because a man led a group of 20 European settlers out of St. Mary's, Maryland, into the heart of central Kentucky, an area where my father was born. And his name was Basil Hayden. And he introduced bourbon to Kentucky. He started that industry. And because it was a small group of settlers, by DNA, I am genetically connected to Basil Hayden. How about that? One of the legacies of enslaved people, certainly, but an interesting history nonetheless. So let's have a taste of this very special pie. Oh, could have sat a little longer, but I was too anxious. Get the rest of that. Have a look. And now I'm going to have a taste. Wow. It's had a ways to go to get here. And that's true of many communities, especially the African American community. So this season, as you bring out your traditional recipes and dishes, share your stories with your family. And until then, subscribe to the channel if you're not already a member. Give us a thumbs up if you like this recipe. Share it with your friends. And do ring the notification bell so you don't miss a single delicious recipe. I'll see you next time. Bye.